All right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jenny Edmondson. I am a public health nutrition consultant from the Division of Food and Nutrition at the Pennsylvania Department of Education. I'm going to be presenting the webinar today. I'm one of the project co-directors, along with Elaine McDonnell from Penn State University. Elaine normally is the sort of the webinar facilitator, but she had some internet problems. She's on the webinar today, but doesn't have audio. So you're stuck with me the whole time. So I'm going to go ahead and just do some quick housekeeping. As I think you heard, this webinar is being recorded. So by staying on the webinar, you agree to that you're okay with being recorded on the webinar today. Please make sure you're getting the audio through your computer volume. When you have questions as we go along, please use the Q&A box to submit those, and we will answer as many as we can at the end. The slides will be posted to the grant website on Project PA. Should be there within 48 hours. And this training, this webinar does count toward your professional standards training. It has been entered into Primero Edge Teamwork, and at the end of the slide deck, there is a certificate that you can use as needed, but it has been entered in Primero Edge. You should be able to find it there. We're also going to ask, participating in this webinar is one of 3 requirements that you need to do to receive your first grant payment, which is 70% of the awarded amount. The other 2 things include registering as a supplier with Penn State University. That's so the payment can be made to your school or school district, and that's what you'll do through Elaine. And then the third thing is the menu cycle, which we'll talk about a little bit more later. But we are going to ask that you go ahead and type your name and the name of your school into the chat box so that we can record that you were here. And for folks who are joining by phone today, we're just going to ask that you send an email to elainem@psu.edu, letting us know that you participated. So I want to welcome you all today. Thank you so much for joining us, and congratulations to you for being awarded a school breakfast expansion grant at your school or schools. The goal today is that by the end of this webinar, you'll have ideas and the resources you need to identify 3 or 4 achievable breakfast menu changes to implement over the grant period to improve the nutritional quality of breakfast at your awarded schools. For those of you who are not the menu planner at your school, we really encourage you to share the webinar recording and the resources with your menu planner when they become available on the grant website. Working with your SFA's menu planner or with your vendor, for those of you who purchase vended meals, is really going to be key in improving your breakfast meals and making a big impact on your students' health. Pennsylvania is a very diverse state, and you know your menus and students best when it comes to identifying menu changes that are going to work for you. So what we're going to talk about today is why you should focus on improving the nutritional value of school breakfast, provide some specific menu changes to focus on, and provide reminders of what is required of you as recipients of the grant. So let's start by talking about why making breakfast more nutritious matters to your students and your school. School meals have a huge impact on and are critical to improving child health. Studies show that many children receive about half of their dietary intake from school breakfast and school lunch meals. And a 5-year study found that children in the United States get their healthiest meals of the day at school. Another study found that students who participate in the school breakfast program eat a breakfast of higher nutritional quality than students who eat breakfast elsewhere. So we know that what you are serving at breakfast matters for your students' health. And these health benefits extend to better student behavior, better attendance, increased motivation, and improved academic performance. And this is why more and more superintendents, teachers, and building principals really want to make breakfast more accessible and more nutritious because they're seeing these benefits in their students. More nutritious meals can also benefit your program. A comprehensive national study found that schools serving healthier meals had participation rates that were 10 percentage points higher than schools that served less healthy meals. Another advantage to improving the nutrition in school breakfast menus now is that the school meal nutrition standards are changing. You may have heard. By identifying and incorporating nutritious menu changes over the course of the grant period, which is now through the end of the 2024-25 school year, your schools will be better positioned to meet the new meal patterns. USDA released a final rule on April 25th that includes several changes to the school nutrition program meal patterns, which are meant to ensure that the meal patterns reflect the most recent dietary guidelines for Americans, which they are required to do by law. At breakfast, these changes include some product-based limits on added sugars in breakfast cereals, flavored milks, and yogurt, starting in school year 2025-26. And later, meeting an average weekly limit of less than 10% of calories from added sugars by school year 2027-28. The changes also include a 10% reduction in sodium at breakfast, starting in school year 2027-28, and a continuation of mostly whole grain, rich grain items, 80%, over the course of the week. As recipients of a school breakfast expansion grant, you agreed to use grant funds to implement projects at your schools to make significant and sustainable changes to meet two grant objectives. The first is to increase participation in the school breakfast program. And although your grant projects vary, many of you will be implementing or expanding an alternative breakfast service method in your awarded schools. Today, however, our focus is on that second grant objective, to improve the nutritional value and appeal of school breakfast meals. We just talked a little bit about why improving the nutritional value of school breakfast is important. So next we want to talk about how schools can do this. And as we walk through this today, try to think about what menu changes you think will work in the menus at your awarded schools. Consider ways that you can serve fewer items that are high in added sugar or sodium. Incorporate a greater variety of protein foods to keep students feeling satisfied through the morning. Serve whole grains and more fresh produce, including whole fruit and non-starchy vegetables at breakfast. Maybe look at recipes to get ideas of scratch or speed scratch menu items your students might get excited about. And along the way, consider ways you might be able to add hot items and reduce prepackaged items to entice more students to eat school breakfast. So let's start with added sugars. Added sugars in our diets include packaged sweeteners we use in standardized recipes or add to our foods, like table sugar, syrups, honey, and agave. Added sugars are also sugars that are added to foods and drinks by the manufacturers. The amount of added sugars in a food is usually written in grams on the label. And if you're a visual person, it can be helpful to think about that 4 grams of added sugars on a food label is the same as 1 teaspoon of table sugar. Added sugars do not include the naturally occurring sugars that are found in milk, fruits, and vegetables. So for example, the total sugars in chocolate milk include the naturally occurring milk sugar, lactose, plus the added sugars that are used to sweeten the milk. So why should we care about added sugars? Well, 70 to 80% of American children consume too much added sugar. The dietary guidelines recommend limiting added sugars to less than 10% of calories because eating patterns higher in added sugars are associated with obesity, type 2 diabetes, and other chronic diseases. We've all probably heard the term empty calories, and what that means in terms of added sugars is that you get the calories or energy from the added sugar, but without the vitamins, minerals, protein, fiber, and other nutrients found in whole foods with naturally occurring sugars, foods like unflavored milk, fruits, and vegetables. And when growing children and adolescents fill up too much on added sugars, this crowds out the more nutritious foods that they need. The easiest way to compare the amount of added sugars in different foods and beverages is to use the nutrition facts label. On this label, we see that 1 cup of breakfast cereal has 8 grams of total sugars per serving. On the line below is where added sugars is listed. And we see that all 8 grams of sugar in this cereal come from added sugars. Added sugars has been required on the nutrition facts label since 2020. However, USDA does not currently require data on added sugars to be included in USDA approved nutrient analysis software. So on Primero Edge, added sugar is included in the menu planning module, but you might find that the data is missing for added sugars in some of the foods and products because when they were entered into the database, that added sugar was not on the nutrition facts label yet. So using the nutrition facts labels to be able to compare products side by side is really going to be the most helpful way to make decisions about the products that you serve. Currently, school breakfasts provide about 17% of calories from added sugars. And remember, that goal is 10%. Over 92% of schools actually exceed the recommended limit for added sugars at breakfast. So there is room for improvement. USDA is using a phased approach to reduce added sugars at breakfast. This includes added sugars in breakfast cereals, flavored milks, and sweetened yogurt, as I mentioned, that begins in the fall of 2025. This targets 3 of the most common sources of added sugars in school meals. Then in the fall of 2027, the final rule limits the overall added sugars across the weekly menu to less than 10% of calories per meal on average to align with the dietary guidelines. Data from the USDA shows that these 10 food items are among the top sources of added sugars at school breakfast. In addition to targeting the added sugars in flavored milk, sweetened ready-to-eat cereals, and sweetened yogurt served at breakfast, menu planners can consider reducing other common sources of added sugars like syrup, frosting, sugar toppings, and similar condiments that are commonly offered with breakfast items. A significant source of added sugars that we want to talk about first is grain-based desserts. Grain-based desserts that are permitted in the school breakfast program for K-12 students include several of the items that you see here: granola bars, breakfast bars, toaster pastries, sweet crackers, and cinnamon buns. So schools can use USDA's Exhibit A grains chart to identify foods that are considered grain-based desserts. For those of you who are not familiar, Exhibit A is a USDA tool that menu planners can use to determine how a grain item credits in the reimbursable meal based on its group in the chart. Grain-based desserts that are permitted at breakfast are marked with a superscript 4 or 5 on the Exhibit A chart. They include a variety of sweet items that tend to be traditional breakfast foods like donuts, coffee cakes, fruit turnovers, granola bars, breakfast bars, toaster pastries, cinnamon buns, and sweet crackers, which include things like animal crackers and graham crackers. So this example here shows the 2 items that are from group F on the chart. Cake has superscript 3, and items with superscript 3 are also grain-based desserts, but they are only permitted to be served at lunch or at snack. Coffee cake is marked with superscript 4, which means that it is a grain-based dessert that is permitted to be served in the school breakfast program for K-12 students. Because so much added sugar comes from these items, an excellent strategy for reducing added sugars at breakfast is to limit the grain-based dessert items that are offered on the weekly menu. Grain-based desserts are often shelf-stable or prepackaged items, which can make them convenient for school food service. However, there's a trade-off. These are frequently the same items that draw concerns from parents, teachers, and others about the amount of added sugars in school breakfast meals. After all, toaster pastries that are made with whole grains are still toaster pastries, complete with the added sugars and sort of the optics of being less healthy or junk foods. A best practice to reduce added sugars in your menu is to use product substitutions or swaps, where you exchange one menu item with another, usually within the same meal component. Replacing grain-based desserts with items lower in added sugars can really make a big difference in the weekly added sugars total. And it works because even small reductions multiplied by many students can make a significant change in your weekly average amounts. Swapping grain-based desserts for lower sugar options can not only reduce added sugars and improve the nutritional quality of breakfast, it can also benefit your program by fostering a more positive perception of school breakfast in your school. A great place to start is by looking at your current breakfast menu, identifying those high sugar grain-based desserts that you currently offer, and making a plan to reduce the number you serve by replacing them with a different menu item that is not a grain-based dessert or is high in sugar. For some of you, cutting back to 1 or 2 servings per week of grain-based desserts might be doable and is an excellent goal. For others of you who offer more grain-based desserts on the weekly menu, you may want to set a more modest initial goal and make your changes over time. If you have a vendor who provides meals for your school, talk to them about your goals. Give them a list of grain-based desserts and work with them to identify lower sugar menu items to offer instead. This slide shows some examples of product substitutions that were part of the toolkit for the Pennsylvania Governor's School Breakfast Challenge that went on earlier this year, and some of you may have participated in that. The link to this resource is at the bottom of the slide, and this will be made available to you when we post them, including there's a recipe for the pumpkin muffin squares as well that you can access from that. Another strategy that we encourage schools to use to reduce added sugars is to serve lower sugar breakfast cereals. You can start by checking the breakfast cereals currently offered on your awarded school's breakfast menu, and then instead of offering higher sugar cereals, instead substitute cereals that have no more than 6 grams of added sugars per dry ounce. And again, you'll get this information from the nutrition facts label on the package and compare it to the chart that will provide so that you can pick lower sugar options. So this is the label from our earlier example. And in this example, a 1 cup or 28 gram serving of the cereal has 8 grams of added sugars. According to the chart, the cereal does not meet the lower sugar standard, which is a maximum of 6 grams of added sugar per 28 gram serving. So if this is a cereal that is currently offered on your breakfast menu, the menu planner could look for a different cereal option that is lower in added sugars to offer in place of this product. The next strategy I want to talk about is serving yogurts that are lower in added sugars. Check the yogurts you plan to serve and select products with no more than 12 grams of added sugars per 6 ounces of yogurt. And again, you'll find the serving size of the yogurt measured in either ounces or grams. Sorry, I lost my place here. Yeah, so you're going to check those measured in ounces or grams and the grams of added sugar per serving from your nutrition facts label. And then again, you can check the chart to determine whether the yogurt is a lower sugar option. And I want to point out, which you may have already figured out, that both the cereals that we talked about and the yogurt, of course, will align with that new final rule and the changes that are coming in the meal patterns. So when you look at the current products you serve, you actually might find that many of the breakfast cereals and yogurts that you already serve meet these lower standards, which is fantastic. But by checking your items, you'll also be able to identify those cereals and yogurts that you can swap out for products that are lower in the added sugars. And this is really a great way to improve your menus and again, get that head start on the new sugar limits on cereal and yogurt that are going to start in school year 25-26. Here are some more ideas for reducing added sugars. Consider offering flavored milk less often, or possibly offering only unflavored milk at breakfast. Schools must offer a milk variety at meals, as you know, so that would mean offering both fat-free and 1% unflavored milk on the days when a flavored milk is not offered. Now, for some of your schools, eliminating flavored milk might not be your first choice. Maybe your students absolutely love chocolate milk, and eliminating it as an option would lead to a drop in milk consumption. And in that case, what you might want to consider is a behavioral economic strategy and simply place the unflavored milk front and center in the cooler so that it's easier for students to select it instead of having to reach farther for that flavored variety. And that can sort of nudge them into selecting the unflavored option. Some items like pancakes, waffles, and French toast are actually not identified as grain-based desserts by USDA, but certainly those typical condiments that we serve with them can be high in added sugars. Sweet spices like cinnamon and ginger, or a dusting of unsweetened cocoa powder, can add flavor and appeal with less added sugar. You could also think about serving fresh fruit or a special house-made strawberry sauce, or simply just look for lower sugar commercial syrup to serve with these items when you offer them. Some schools have been successful with savory options, like a waffle sandwich with melted cheese, or a pancake taco with commodity egg or sausage patties and cheese. Muffins and quick breads are also not considered grain-based desserts by USDA, but can certainly be high in added sugars. So again, check that nutrition facts label on commercial items and select lower sugar, lower added sugar varieties. Also, offer muffins and quick breads that get some of their natural sweetness from fruits or vegetables like apple cinnamon, banana walnut, or blueberry muffins, and banana bread or zucchini breads, instead of options that have chocolate chips, for example, that are sweetened entirely by added sugars. So let's look at just a few examples that show how simple swaps can impact the amount of added sugars at breakfast. So the meal on the left includes a toaster pastry, blueberry Greek yogurt, mixed berries, and fat-free chocolate milk. This meal has 47 grams of added sugars and 26% of calories coming from added sugars. By swapping out the toaster pastry for a lower sugar cereal and selecting an unflavored milk variety, the meal goes from 47 to just 8 grams of added sugars, and from 26% to only 6% of calories from added sugars. In this next example, the meal on the left includes cinnamon rolls, grapes, and fat-free chocolate milk. This meal has 18 grams of added sugars and 13% of calories from added sugars, so that's not too bad. But by swapping out the grain-based dessert for a whole grain rich bagel with light cream cheese and selecting an unflavored milk variety, the meal drops down to 0 grams of added sugars. So now that we've covered added sugars, let's talk next about sodium. Consuming too much sodium can have a significant health impact, such as stroke or heart disease. And high sodium intake is associated with high blood pressure in children, which I was actually surprised to learn about, affecting 1 in 6 kids ages 8 to 17. Based on the dietary guidelines, the average American's daily sodium intake is close to 50% higher than what is recommended. And we know that food and taste preferences develop at an early age, so limiting sodium in childhood, including in school meals, is really important for establishing lifelong healthy patterns of eating. USDA's final rule includes 10% reduction in weekly sodium at breakfast, and this will not be starting until school year 2027-28. And this is to bring the sodium levels more in line with the dietary guidelines. Most sodium comes from salt that is added during food processing and preparation. And as program operators, you are likely familiar with the menu items that contribute the most sodium at breakfast on your school menus. Recently, the US Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, released voluntary sodium reduction goals for food manufacturers in the United States. So USDA is leveraging these recommendations for the food industry with the goal for schools to implement gradual sodium reductions on your menus, starting as soon as possible, to hopefully allow your students' palates to adjust over time to less sodium. And at the same time, the food industry will be developing these improved lower sodium products that will make reducing sodium more feasible on your menus. So what are some strategies for reducing sodium in your breakfast menus? As with reducing added sugars, you can use product substitution. Adjusting how often high sodium menu items are served and finding lower sodium versions of existing menu items are two small changes that can make a big difference in your weekly sodium total. Some sneaky sources of sodium at breakfast that can add up include flavored milk, actually. This is because additional sodium is added to flavored milk during processing. Some ready-to-eat cereals and potato products like tater tots and hash browns can also contribute more sodium than you might think, so those are good places to look. So identifying these items on your breakfast menu and then scanning the market to see if lower sodium versions are available could really lead to a successful product substitution and impact on your menus. Again, menu planners can check nutrition facts labels. You could also use Primero Edge or other USDA approved nutrition software to compare products if they are entered in there. I know that many of you plan to do student taste testing as part of your grant projects. Taste tests are a great tool to introduce new items and help menu planners learn which items are more likely to be successful based on student feedback. In many schools, breakfast sandwiches, we know, are really popular. Commercially available options, especially sandwiches on biscuits, can be particularly high in sodium. So for those of you who like to have numbers or who want to have guidelines to give to your food vendors, I included some suggested sodium guidelines from the FDA here on the slide. To bring weekly average sodium down, menu planners do not have to eliminate popular items. Again, that really good strategy is to offer lower sodium entrees on several days of the week to balance out the days when popular entrees that are higher in sodium are offered. Another idea is to offer more whole grains like oatmeal, granola, grab-and-go grain bowls made with quinoa or steel-cut oats, for example. These are naturally going to be lower in sodium than the more processed grains like breads, bagels, biscuits, and tortillas. You can think about seasoning and flavoring foods with fresh or dried herbs and spices or salt-free seasoning blends. Using chopped aromatic vegetables like ingredients like garlic, carrots, celery, onions, bell peppers that smell wonderful and traveling down the hallway when students come in when they're sauteed and taste delicious on top of that. Citrus juices are a great option. Adding that using orange, lemon, or lime juice can kind of give you that hit of acid that really makes the food taste great. Also look for lower sodium cheeses. Swiss, Monterey Jack, cheddar, and mozzarella cheeses are generally going to be lower in sodium than processed cheeses like American. I want to talk a little bit about a sometimes overlooked superhero component in food, which is fiber. I'm betting that all of you have at some point heard concerns about school breakfast quality and nutrition in the media, maybe from parents, others at your school. For example, concerns about refined grains, about ultra processed items, the amount of juice that's being offered to students. And something that these foods all have in common is that they contain little to no dietary fiber. Fiber is important because it can reduce the risk of heart disease and help with digestive health. And day to day, fiber is important because it helps students to feel full and to maintain that sort of steady rise and fall in blood sugar that we want. It doesn't cause those spikes in blood sugar like other carbohydrates can. Some strategies to increase fiber and nutrition in breakfast meals include bumping up the percentage of whole grains, rich grains per week. Whole grains, as you probably know, include the bran and the germ, which are components of the grain that are full of fiber. They provide B vitamins and also vitamins A, E, and iron. And so in refined grains, those nutrients and fibers get stripped away. The meal patterns require schools to offer 80% of grains as whole grain rich items each week. That hasn't changed. But maybe you at your school, you could offer more. Some of you might be able to bump it up to 100% of whole grain rich items at breakfast. And that's really a great way to bump up the fiber and improve the nutrition of your meals. Another strategy is serving more whole fruit or fruit pieces at breakfast instead of offering juice. Some of you I know will be purchasing fresh fruit slicers with your grant funds, and using tools like this to offer fresh fruit in a way that's easy to eat can really encourage students to eat more whole fruits. And as you know, whole fruits are going to have that fiber that the juice is missing. Menu planners also have the option to serve vegetables in place of fruits on the breakfast menu. Starchy items like hash browns do tend to be popular, but you can also think about incorporating more non-starchy vegetables at breakfast to really add that color, variety, again, the fiber and nutrition to your breakfast menus. And vegetables can really work beautifully with savory breakfast options like salsa with breakfast burritos, or again, the sauteed onions, peppers, and tomatoes in an egg dish. We actually did a breakfast survey earlier this school year in Pennsylvania, and we heard from some schools that a barrier to participation at breakfast is that students get tired of the same items at breakfast. So we just want you to be aware, if you aren't already, that there are a lot of really wonderful recipe resources available to inspire you to incorporate more whole grains and vegetables at breakfast, and we'll look at a few of those in just a moment. Before we get on to the recipes, I want to talk about protein foods at breakfast. Meats and meat alternates can provide B vitamins, iron, zinc, and other nutrients, and importantly, they also provide protein. USDA reminds us that children and adolescents who eat a protein-rich breakfast report lower hunger for up to 4 hours, which is really something, and a great reason to try and add more protein to your breakfast meals. Under the new meal patterns that start July 1st, and actually, you know what? I have the wrong date on the slide. It starts July 1st, 2024. So sorry for that typo. I will fix it before we post the slides. But under these new meal patterns that are starting July 1st, serving meat and meat alternates at breakfast is actually easier because the final rule establishes a combined grains and meat alternates meal component in the school breakfast program. And it removes the requirement for schools to offer 1 ounce equivalent of grains each day at breakfast. So starting with the upcoming school year, schools may offer grains, meat alternates, or a combination of both to meet the minimum ounce equivalent in this new combined meal pattern component. Offering meats and meat alternates is another excellent strategy to make menus more nutritious and to offer more variety to your students. Many meat alternates are served hot, so serving them is a popular way to boost breakfast appeal for students who really love those hot items. I know we've heard from some of our round one grantees who have talked about serving more hot sandwiches. And, you know, they said these rival the ones at Wawa and Dunkin'. And, you know, they're really trying to promote those and market it to the kids that, hey, you can come to school and get these for free. You don't need to stop on the way to school and pay for it. Some of you I know already have or will be investing in insulated bags for hot holding with your grant. So you're going to be in a great position to offer more hot items, including meat alternates. And there's also a lot of room for including cold or shelf-stable items that work well in alternative service methods, and for schools that maybe just don't have the capacity for many hot items. Yogurt on its own or in a parfait or a yogurt bowl, nut butter sandwiches, cheese sticks, trail mix with nuts, nut butter sandwiches, hard-boiled eggs. These are all examples that are cold examples where you can bump up the protein at breakfast. In addition to traditional hot breakfast sandwiches, which you can, of course, purchase individually wrapped or make them in-house, you can also consider other favorites that maybe you haven't thought about at breakfast, something like grilled cheese or chicken sliders, PB&J or cheese quesadillas. You can even think outside the box and consider plant-based options from like beans, peas, and lentils at breakfast. There are some recipes out there that use roasted chickpeas as an ingredient in granola. You could try breakfast lentil quesadillas, and we provide a link there to an organization called USA Pulses that has some breakfast recipes for schools available at that link. I also put a reminder at the bottom of the slide because sometimes recipes you find online, depending on where you're getting them from, can have crediting inaccuracies. So it's always important to check those. Be sure to standardize recipes for use in your own school and verify that crediting. School recipes, though, that originate from the USDA or from the Institute of Child Nutrition, we also call that the ICN, and from Pennsylvania Harvest of the Month, however, have all been vetted. So the crediting on those has been validated before they're posted. So let's look at some of these recipe ideas. As I mentioned, we have heard from schools in the state that a barrier to participation is that students get tired of the same items being served. So adding a featured, made from scratch or speed scratch menu item can really get students excited about breakfast and increase participation. And on top of that, it can be a source of pride and accomplishment for your staff. There are many delicious and healthy recipes that feature whole grains, vegetables, and protein foods that are out there to inspire you, including hot options and cold options. At the top left is a baked oatmeal with a surprise. It's made with apples and beets, both of which are Pennsylvania Harvest of the Month items. This recipe actually was developed by Palmyra School District right here in Pennsylvania as part of the Teen Nutrition Training Grant. Next to that is a breakfast burrito with corn, onions, and peppers served with salsa. And next to that is homemade granola with dried fruit. All three of these recipes are found on USDA's Child Nutrition Recipe Box, and that is housed on the ICN's website. At the bottom left is a crisp apple and peanut butter wrap that is on the Pennsylvania Harvest of the Month website. Next to that is a mango smoothie bowl and a seasonal fruit and yogurt parfait, again, from USDA's Child Nutrition Recipe Box. Then those three recipes that are stacked on the right side of the screen are from the International Fresh Produce Foundation. So from the top down, they include carrot cake overnight oatmeal, breakfast cheddar sheet tray omelet, and breakfast vegetable quesadilla. We did find, they had some really nice recipes in their resource. We did find a few crediting errors on them. Largely, they didn't break out the vegetable subgroups was one of the issues we found. But we have entered these recipes into Primero Edge, and we did make sure that the crediting was corrected on those. And for those of you that use Primero Edge, you can locate recipes that are from Pennsylvania Harvest of the Month or from the Produce Foundation by typing in the tag box, PAHOM for Pennsylvania Harvest of the Month, or PAIFPA, and that will bring up the list of the recipes from these two resources. Some of you, I know, plan to offer smoothies as part of expanding your breakfast program, since these are a popular item that can boost participation at breakfast. So we wanted to provide a few reminders about smoothies and how they can credit. USDA has a smoothie resource that has multiple samples of offer versus serve menus, tips, and crediting guidance for offering smoothies. Although when the new final rule came out, USDA pulled it down, and that is because of that the new meat alternate, the combined meat alternate and grains component. So they need to go ahead and update the resource to align with the final rule. It will be back eventually, hopefully soon, because I think that it is a very nicely done resource. But a number of things about smoothies are not changing. Things like what credits in smoothies. which meal components do. So milk, yogurt, fruits, and vegetables that are used in smoothies can credit toward the meal pattern requirements. Remember that fruits and vegetables that you use as ingredients in smoothies are going to credit based on their pureed volume, because that's the volume served to the student. Sometimes smoothies will include ingredients for taste or texture, things like oats, nuts, seeds, or nut or seed butters, or even like silken tofu, sometimes people will use. It is definitely okay to use those ingredients, but they are not actually allowed to credit in smoothies. No grains are allowed to credit in smoothies, and the only meat alternate that may credit is yogurt. Of course, those things do count toward the weekly diet specifications when you're doing your nutrient analysis. An important thing to keep in mind is that smoothies containing herbal supplements or protein powders are not allowed. That if you use those in your smoothie, none of the ingredients in the smoothie can credit toward the reimbursable meal. So you do not want to add any type of supplements at all to your smoothies. Remember that USDA wants you to use signage and your menus to highlight the meal components in the smoothie. So, it might be you might just want to list it like as strawberry and yogurt smoothie or fruit and milk smoothie. As you all should have heard by now, free school breakfast program meals for all students will be continuing in Pennsylvania, which is fabulous news. In December, this language was actually incorporated into the Pennsylvania School Code. The availability of free breakfast meals obviously removes a huge barrier to participation. So we at PDE we continue to encourage schools to make breakfast more accessible to students through alternative meal service methods and by serving appealing and nutritious meals, which is exactly what you all on the call are doing with your grants. And we are very excited for you to be implementing your plans to do this. As a reminder, schools, sponsors that are not CEP schools must ensure that their point of service systems, POS, are set up to accommodate free breakfast for all students while maintaining a record of each student's eligibility status when they receive their meal. So in other words, if you are not a CEP school, each breakfast meal must be claimed by the student's actual eligibility status, free, reduced, or paid. And then when the claim is entered, CN pairs will calculate the difference in reimbursement that is paid with state funds. Schools can utilize a mobile POS or use manual rosters at kiosks or hallway carts when students receive their meals to do the POS. And schools must also ensure adequate internal controls are in place so that no second meals can be counted for reimbursement. As grantees, you are required to provide 2 one-week breakfast menu cycles in Primero Edge as part of receiving this grant. The first 1 week cycle menu should be provided as soon as possible. I know that Elaine has sent you in an email the link, and we provided again here on the slide. And what this needs to be is a 5-day breakfast menu cycle served in school year 23-24 prior to project initiation at your awarded school. And it should really just represent a typical weekly menu. So you'll use that link there just to fill out a survey and provide the name of the menu cycle into the online form. And then that will assist us to locate it on Primero Edge. The second menu cycle will be a menu cycle served closer to the end of the grant period after you have implemented strategies to make your menus more nutritious and appealing at your awarded school. So this we're looking at more probably in the spring of 2025. So we're essentially doing a pre-post to see what changes schools have made on their menus to make them more nutritious and appealing. So just to be clear, because some folks have gotten a little confused about what we're looking for, we need the menu cycle to be entered into Primero Edge, and that includes the plan number of reimbursable servings for each of the menu items that are served. This is what SFAs do to ensure that their weekly menus are compliant, and also what you do when you have an administrative review, for example. I want to stress that these are being used only for grant purposes to, again, compare your awarded schools menus from before the grant period began until after you have implemented your grant projects to see if menus have improved. So specifically, the data that we're going to be looking at on these menus are its weekly sodium, weekly sugar, the number of grain-based desserts that you serve, the percentage of whole grain rich grains, the number of meat and meat alternates offered at breakfast, the servings of vegetables that you offer, and particularly non-starchy vegetables, and the percentage of fruits that are offered as juice on the menu. So this brings us to our poll question, which I'm going to see, hopefully, I mentioned Elaine was having some technical issues on her end, so I'm hoping she's going to be able to bring up the poll. Wonderful. So what we want to ask you today is, which of the menu changes that we talked about do you intend to address to make your breakfast meals more nutritious at your school? And you can select all that apply here. So the first one is to reduce the number of grain-based desserts offered. So these, remember, are things like cinnamon rolls, toaster pastries, granola bars, cereal bars, sweet crackers, fruit turnovers, donuts, coffee cakes. Do you think you can offer lower sugar cereals? Remember, you could just check those nutrition facts labels and select cereals that are lower in added sugars according to the chart. Offer lower sugar yogurts. Again, you'll be checking those labels and select yogurts that are lower in added sugars. Maybe you plan to reduce weekly added sugars through other strategies. Remember, things like serving flavored milk fewer times per week, using lower sugar condiments, serving items that are sweetened naturally with fruit instead of ones with chocolate or icing or sugar, using sweet spices like cinnamon and ginger instead for sweetness. How about reducing the average weekly sodium? For example, will you look for lower sodium versions of popular items you offer in your menus? Will you try to balance out the average weekly sodium by offering low sodium entrees several days of the week so you can offer some of those higher sodium favorites? How about replacing refined grains with whole grain rich items? Can you maybe bump up more than that required 80% of items that you offer as whole grain rich during the week? Another thing, offering more meats or meat alternates at breakfast to really bump up those protein options. In addition to meats, of course, things like yogurt parfaits, cheese sticks, eggs, those nut butter sandwiches. Some of you might be thinking about offering more vegetables at breakfast, doing more savory dishes. Again, particularly not those starchy items, although we know kids really do like those too. And some of you might be thinking that you could reduce the percentage of fruit that you offer as juice by instead offering more whole and cut up fruits or vegetables instead. All right, so thank you for everyone who participated. I think we can probably end our poll. All right, so we have a lot. It looks like everybody's picked at least some strategies here and got some ideas today. Love to see the grain-based desserts. Those are such, the ones that give school breakfast a bad rap. So great to be able to, substitute some other things. Again, targeting those lower sugar cereals and yogurts is going to get you a head start on the new meal patterns that you're going to have to implement school year 25-26. Looking at some of those other strategies for reducing sugar, awesome. I mean, you guys picked everything. Some more protein at breakfast through those meat alternates, vegetables. So great to see this. And thank you all for participating in the poll and participating today. So in addition to the slides and a recording of today's webinar, we're also going to post a quick sheet on the grant website that summarizes these strategies that we reviewed today, and it includes the added sugar charts for school breakfast, cereals, and for yogurts. Schools that purchase meals will want to share this with your vendor. It's a good way to sort of present that information to them. And it can really just be used as a resource to begin that conversation between the menu planner at your SFA and the food service staff at your awarded schools. So before we move on to your questions, so again, please feel free to type in any questions in the Q&A box, and we will address those here shortly. I want to talk just a moment about, well, one more thing first is, if you haven't done so already, please go ahead and type your name and the name of your awarded school into the chat box. We're going to use that to confirm your participation in the webinar today. And if you are joining by phone, you can just send an email to elainem@psu.edu and letting Elaine know that you participated. So this is the thing I wanted to talk about before we go on to your questions. We wanted to let you know that we will once again be offering this summer some culinary training sessions for school food service personnel. For those of you who have been around in food service in Pennsylvania for the past decade or so, you'll know that we have, for most summers, offered culinary in-person training sessions for food service staff. These are 2-day hands-on sessions with a certified chef. These particular sessions focus on Pennsylvania Harvest of the Month items, but there will be some focus on, they will include some breakfast recipes that Chef Bill is going to make as part of the training. There are travel scholarships available as well. And schools that are represented at the training are eligible for grants of up to $1,000 to conduct taste tests. So you can find out more information on the Project PA website. Just click on the Culinary Training Sessions button. The dates and the locations are listed here. And Elaine reminded me that that these sessions actually are full, but don't be discouraged. If you would like to attend or your staff want to attend, please go ahead and get on the wait list. What we have found in past years is that, you know, people sign up and then summer comes and things come up, they go on vacation or whatever, and so they maybe can't wind up going. And so we've usually been able to accommodate most or even sometimes the entire wait list for different sessions. So if you're interested, please go ahead and sign up. These are really awesome sessions. Folks really enjoy them. All right, so we can go ahead and move on to your questions. I think we only have one so far that I've seen on here. Someone asked, if we don't use Primero Edge for menu planning, how should we upload our breakfast menu and analysis that is used by our food service management company? So that is a great question. So for folks who, some food service management companies do use Primero Edge, they just have their own realm, like the nutrition group does and some others. So when you fill out that online survey that tells me the menu cycle name, you'll note on there that it's under the nutrition group's realm instead of PDE's shared realm that that most schools use in the state. Some FSMCs do not use Primero Edge. They use another software program, and we can work with you on that. So you can just send an email to me, and we can we've been able to figure out which reports from your program will work. And generally, again, it's going to be the reports that you would use during the administrative review. So it's usually the food component report, the compliance report that shows your weekly, are you meeting the weekly juice limits? Are you serving enough whole grain rich items? How many of each meal component are you offering per week? And then your nutrient analysis, which will give us the sodium and hopefully also the sugar, and have your menus and your menu items usually listed as a report with that. So yeah, we can work with you. We don't want you to have to re-enter anything into Primero Edge if you already have it in USDA approved nutrient analysis software. So we will absolutely work with you on that. Okay. So Bridget asked, I had requested to purchase a laptop, but found an all-in-one desktop, which would be cheaper overall. Do I need approval to make this change? And what if items are cheaper now than when I wrote the grant? So Bridget, what we would just ask you to do is send Elaine and me an email, and let us know, what your budget changes, what you're proposing to change and what has changed in it. Most likely, as long as you're, staying within items that are that fall under your grant, it's not going to be a problem. So just let us know, and we can work with you on that. You are welcome. Any other questions? Just checking. Oh, somebody said in the chat they made the pumpkin muffin squares and they were delicious. So that's good feedback. Thank you. Thank you, Beth, for that feedback. Good to know. All right. Are production records required? Most likely no, because at least on the Primero Edge reports, if you're familiar with Primero Edge and the reports on that, again, it's that food component report and the nutrient analysis report. The nutrient analysis report actually lists, it has Monday through Friday and lists all of the menu items that are offered each day. So I don't need production records because that's going to have everything that you offered. So if you're using something that isn't Primero Edge and isn't going to give me all of everything that you offered on that weekly menu, maybe I would need that. But the reason we would use that again is because we're looking at how many grain-based desserts you offered, how many meat alternates, that stuff. So hopefully, most likely, no, we wouldn't need production records. All right. Well, it looks like we are not getting any more questions, and we are just about at the end of our time anyway. So again, thank you all so much for joining us today. Please remember that Elaine and I are available for any questions you have, concerns, things coming up with the budget, whatever you need, let us know. And again, this will all be posted on the Project PA website. If you just go to the grant there, and you'll find all these things posted within the next couple of days. So thank you again for joining us, and have a good evening.